What was interesting about my career, though, I told you I was a contracting officer, but that really was only a small part of it, because I was in San Antonio when I was a lieutenant, and I was working on a contract, and I got a phone call. And, I figured it was just a business or somebody wanted to know the status of a bid or something, and I picked it up, and it turned out it was Captain somebody from the Air Force Academy. And he said, "Are you Lieutenant Halgarth?" And I said, "Yeah." "What can I do for you, Captain?" He said, "Well, do you have a BA in philosophy?" And I said, "Our records show that you do." I said, "Yes, I do." "Yeah, we saw that." He said, "Would you be interested in teaching philosophy at the Air Force Academy?" And I said, "Oh, okay. What does that entail?" He said, "Well, we fly you out here. We'd have to have you do an audition, because we don't just let anybody teach at the Air Force Academy." And I said, "Yeah, I'm willing to try out. If you need somebody, I'd love to do that." And when I told my wife, she said, "Yeah, you got to do that. That's for you." And this was 1991, so I flew out to the academy and I gave a lecture, and the colonel met everybody in the philosophy department. They had philosophy and fine arts. It was one of their departments. It was wedged between political science and psychology, which they called behavioral science. And I gave a talk and I answered some questions, and they went out of the room and came back in 5 minutes and they said, "You're hired." So the Air Force sent me to get my master's that fall. So instead of contracting, I had been working to go get a master's in contracting over in Dayton, and I was going to stay in that field. So I just thought, well, this is my job. And this is what people in my job do. They go for further training. And so they said, so I went from being a contracting officer in like 2 weeks. I got moved over to, I went to the University of Oklahoma and got my master's in philosophy in about 14 months. And then went out to the Air Force Academy and taught philosophy for 4 years.
And what years was that again?
92 to 96 or 97. And then while I was there, I was considered and accepted to go back and get my PhD and come back to the academy. The academy has to have a minimum of 35% PhDs on staff in order to keep their accreditation. So people who teach at the academy, if they want to compete have to compete for the slots to go get their PhD. So I'm doing my thing, and I get picked up for a PhD. So what I did was I went back to the contracting field and commanded a flight, which I've already told you about. But I did that so that I could make major. And then I went in for 3 years, went to graduate school on the Air Force at the University of Florida and did my PhD. Went back to the academy and worked and taught philosophy, military ethics, medical ethics, world religions, all sorts of stuff, American philosophy. And then retired in 2007, and because I had a PhD and had about 8 years of teaching experience and done some things, we always wanted to come back to Texas, so I got hired by Tarleton. And the only reason that I'm still a professor is because the Air Force decided to make me a professor. Mm-hmm. Right. So I was at the academy in Colorado Springs for about 8 years of my career. So contracting really only figured out to be about 6 years. and another 4 in graduate school, and then most of the time I was a professor. And then various other duties, you do different things.